Then, recently, someone pointed a new kind of imaging at it. Not a chemical, not a brush, a scan that reads the depth of every stroke beneath the glassy surface, layer by layer, and reconstructs what the scribe pressed before the fire deformed it. The tablet gave up its text, all of it. And the people who read the reconstruction did not announce it the way you announce a discovery. They announced it the way you report a problem. It is worth pausing on how the text came back, because the method matters to the story. When clay is fired past a certain point, it does not simply harden, it deforms. The surface flows, the crisp wedges of the cuneiform slump and merge, and the writing becomes, to the eye and to every traditional technique, an unreadable smear of glass. For most of a century, that was the end of it. You cannot photograph what has melted. You cannot take a rubbing of a surface that has run like wax. The tablet was, for all practical purposes, a sealed letter no one could open. What changed is that we learned to read beneath a surface instead of across it. The newer imaging does not look at the face of the tablet. It looks into it, mapping the density and depth of the clay layer by layer, reconstructing the shape the scribe's stylus made before the fire ever touched it. The deformation on top stops mattering because the record of the original strokes is preserved below, in the way the clay was compressed when it was still soft. Feed enough of those layers into a reconstruction, and the wedges reassemble out of the glass, and a text illegible for 4,000 years simply appears, line by line, as if it had been waiting. There is an irony in that which I cannot shake. The tablet, if we read it correctly, is a warning about what happens when a civilization grows so advanced and so confident that it forgets the older knowledge, lets the watch lapse, stops believing there was ever anything to fear. And it was our most advanced technology, the very kind of cleverness the tablet seems to warn about, that reached into the burned clay and pulled the warning back out. We built a machine sophisticated enough to recover a message that says, in part, beware the moment you become too sophisticated to listen. The scribe, I think, would not have been surprised. He wrote for a reader he could not imagine, in a language he assumed would be dead, on a tablet he may have known was about to burn. He pressed the warning as deep into the clay as he could, betting that someone, someday, with tools he could not dream of, would dig deep enough to find it. He won that bet. The only question the tablet leaves open is whether we won anything by reading it, or whether we found the message exactly one generation too late to do anything but understand it. Because the burned tablet is not a hymn, and it is not an account, it is a countdown. It names a group the Sumerians called the Watchers. It describes where they were sent and why, and in its final intact lines, it does something almost no ancient document ever does. It gives a year, a specific year in a counting system we can convert. The year the Watchers were said to return. This is the story of the tablet that survived the fire, what the scan pulled out of the glass, and the date it points to, and I am going to be straight with you about that date, because the truth about it is stranger than any number I could invent. Let's read what the fire could not erase. First, the Watchers, because everything depends on who they were, and the Sumerians were not vague about it. The word, in the oldest layer, means those who watch, those who keep their eyes open. In later tongues it becomes the Watchers, the ones who do not sleep, and the same root travels forward into much later traditions that describe beings who watch the earth, came down to it, and were judged for what they did here. But the Sumerian version is older than all of those, and colder. It does not romanticize them, it calls them a function. They were set to watch, that was their purpose, and at some point the tablets say, the Watchers stopped only watching, they came down, they mixed with what they found here. They taught things that were not theirs to teach, and they took things that were not theirs to take, and the result was a generation the Sumerians describe with the same unease every time it appears. The great ones, the mighty ones, the ones who were larger, the offspring of the Watchers and the earth, the giants of the world before the flood. To understand how seriously the Sumerians took the Watchers, you have to see how consistently they appear, and how the story refuses to soften no matter who is telling it. In the oldest Sumerian fragments, they are a class of beings set in place by the highest authority, given a duty over the earth. In the Akkadian and Babylonian layers that inherit them, they keep the same shape, appointed observers who overstepped. And when the story travels forward, out of Mesopotamia, and into the traditions that borrowed from it, the watchers arrive nearly intact. Beings who descended, who took human partners, who taught forbidden arts, the working of metal and weapons, the cutting of roots, the reading of signs, and whose children were a race of giants the world could not sustain. The remarkable thing is not that one culture told this story. The remarkable thing is that it is the same story across thousands of years and a half-dozen languages, with the same crime, the same offspring, the same judgment. Details that travel that far without dissolving are usually not inventions. They are inheritances. Something was being passed down, hand to hand, too important to change. The Sumerian version is the headwater, and it is the least decorated. There is no romance in it. The Watchers are not tragic lovers or fallen heroes. They are a security failure. They were posted, and they abandoned the post, and they contaminated what they were posted to guard. And the cleanup was the flood. The burned tablet treats all of this as established fact, summarized in a few lines, because the scribe is not telling the story for the first time. He is filing the final paperwork on it. He writes the Watcher's crime the way a clerk writes a case number. A reference, not a narrative. And then he moves on to the only part that is new, the part that is the reason the tablet exists at all. Not what the Watchers did when they get out. And the flood, in the Sumerian account, was not a random disaster. It was a response, a correction, an attempt to wipe the board clean of what the Watchers had started. But a flood drowns the surface. It does not reach the deep, and it does not reach the height. So before the waters came, the dangerous ones were dealt with another way, sealed. The many below, beneath the earth, behind the seven, the Watchers themselves, bound and set apart, to be held until a time that was fixed in advance. Until, there is that word again. The Sumerians kept writing until, and the burned tablet for the first time tells us until what. Here is what the scan recovered. And here is why the people who read it went quiet. The tablet is laid out in 3 parts. The first part names the Watchers and their crime, briefly, the way you would write a charge sheet, because the scribe assumed the reader already knew the story. The second part describes the binding, the sealing, the division of the dangerous ones between the deep and the height. None of that was new. We had pieces of it from other tablets. The third part is the one that had never been read, because it was the most badly burned, and it is the one that matters. The third part is a reckoning of time. It is written in the Sumerian sexagesimal system, the base 60, counting they used for everything from circles to calendars. The system that is the reason we still have 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. And it counts forward. Pause on the choice of base 60, because it is not a quaint detail. 60 divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. It is the most flexible counting base a civilization has ever used, which is exactly why it survived into our clocks and our compasses thousands of years after the empire that invented it turned to dust. The Sumerians did not choose it for poetry. They chose it because it let them divide time and angle and arc without remainder, which is what you need if you are going to track the heavens with precision. And track them they did. The astronomical records that come down from Mesopotamia are not vague. They are tables, columns of numbers, the positions of the moon and the planets logged and predicted with an accuracy that startles the people who study them. These were not stargazers making wishes. These were the first true astronomers, keeping ledgers of the sky, so when that same civilization with that same toolkit writes a count, it is not writing a round mythological number like 1,000 years or 7 generations. It writes a reckoning in the base it used for everything it took seriously, from a fixed zero to a fixed terminus. The burned tablet's countdown is built the way they built a star table, as a calculation. And that is what makes the conversion so unsettling, even after you strip away every supernatural claim. We are not dealing with a vague prophecy that says someday the gods will return. We are dealing with an arithmetic problem, set up by the best mathematicians of the ancient world, that resolves to a span of time. And that span, laid against our calendar, ends near us. The conversion is where the honesty has to live. So let me show you the machinery, instead of hiding it. To turn the count into a year, you need three things: the length of the count, which the tablet gives in sexagesimal cycles, and which the scan recovered almost completely; the size of each cycle, which we know from other Sumerian texts; and the 0 point, the date of the flood the tablet counts from, which we do not know precisely, and which is the source of nearly all the uncertainty. Move the flood baseline earlier, and the terminus slides toward our recent past. Move it later, and the terminus slides toward our near future. But here is the part that does not move. Across the entire range of flood dates that serious chronologies consider plausible, the terminus never lands far from now. It cannot be pushed into a safe, distant future, and it cannot be pushed into a comfortably dead past. The arithmetic has a narrow target, and we are standing inside it. That is the whole reason the people who read the reconstruction reported it as a problem rather than a curiosity. A countdown that ends in the year 3000 before our era is archaeology. A countdown that ends 10,000 years from now is science fiction. A countdown that ends, no matter how you set the dial, somewhere in the handful of generations on either side of the people reading it, is something else entirely. It forces a choice between two uncomfortable conclusions. Either the scribe, by pure chance, built a calculation that happens to point at the reader, or the scribe knew something about when and built the calculation to say so. It takes the moment of the binding, the moment the watches were sealed before the flood, as its 0, and it counts in great cycles to a second moment, a named moment. The moment the text calls the opening, or the loosing, or, most directly, the return. The scribe did not write the return as a hope. He did not write it as a prophecy in the way we use that word, a vague someday. He wrote it as an appointment, a scheduled event. The watchers were sealed for a fixed term, the tablet says, and the term has a length, and the length is written right there in the clay, in numbers, recovered from under the glass. Now, the honest part, immediately, before your imagination runs, because this is exactly where every doomsday huckster on the internet lies to you, and I will not. Converting that number to a year on our calendar is not clean. It cannot be. To turn a Sumerian count from the flood into a date on a Gregorian calendar, you have to know exactly when their 0 was, and their 0 is the flood. And the date of the flood in real chronology is one of the most argued questions in the entire field. Different baselines give different answers. The error bars are not small. Anyone who tells you the tablet names a precise day is selling you something. So I am not going to give you a day. I am going to give you something I think is more unsettling than a day, which is the range and what sits inside it. When you take the tablet's count and apply the spread of accepted dates for the flood event the Sumerians referenced, the return does not land in the deep past. It does not land safely behind us, a prophecy that already failed and can be laughed off. And it does not land in some distant future 10,000 years away that we never have to think about. It lands in a window that brackets our own era, a window measured in generations, not millennia. Depending on which flood baseline you choose, the return either falls within the last few generations, meaning the term has just elapsed, or it falls within the next few, meaning it is about to. Every reasonable baseline puts the opening near us. None of them put it comfortably far away. That is the part that does not depend on believing in watchers at all. You can think the entire thing is mythology, and you are still left with the strange fact that an ancient countdown, started at a prehistoric event and run forward in base 60, happens to terminate in the narrow slice of time that includes the people watching this. Of all the eras it could have pointed to, it points at now. Let me show you why I do not think that is a coincidence the scribe stumbled into. because the tablet anticipates the objection. The burned tablet does not only give the number, it gives signs. It lists, in the recovered text, the markers that are supposed to precede the return, the way you would list the symptoms that come before a fever breaks. And the scribe is careful to say these are not the return itself. They are the warnings that the term is nearly spent. The countdown's final ticks. The signs are damaged in places, but several came through the scan intact, and reading them is an uncomfortable experience because they are not the usual apocalyptic furniture. They are specific, and they are strange. The first sign concerns the deep. The tablet says that before the watchers return from the height, the lowest seals beneath the earth will loosen first. And the sign of this will be that the ground gives up sounds and openings it should not, that the earth will be found hollow where it was thought solid. We have already read on another tablet about the city that widens as it descends and the seals set to fail from the bottom up. The burned tablet ties the two together. The loosening below is the first warning that the term above is also ending. The deep and the height were sealed at the same moment. They come open on the same clock. The second sign concerns the watching itself. The tablet says the return draws near when the watch is abandoned, when the counting stops, when the people who were set to mark the nights and keep the reckoning forget that they were ever keeping it. The scribe writes this almost as a lament, as if he could see it coming, that the knowledge would be lost, that a generation would arise that no longer counted, that no longer watched, that no longer even believed there was anything to watch for, and that this forgetting, the tablet says, is not merely a failure. It is itself one of the signs. The term ends when no one is left who remembers it was running. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the most quietly disturbing idea on the tablet. The Sumerians built a watch that lasted thousands of years, passed down through Babylon and beyond. The obsessive tracking of the moon, the reckoning of the great cycles, the rituals at every eclipse, and the burned tablet says the binding would hold as long as that watch held, and that the end of the watch would coincide with the end of the term. The forgetting and the return were scheduled to arrive together, which means, if the tablet is taken at its word, that a civilization confident there is nothing to watch for is not evidence that the danger passed. It is the final sign that the danger is here. Before the third sign, sit with the first two a moment longer, because they are not the vague portents that fill ordinary prophecies. They are specific enough to be tested, and that is what makes them uncomfortable. The first sign, the loosening of the deep, is described in physical terms. The ground will be found hollow, where it was thought solid. It will give up sounds and openings it should not. The lowest barriers will fail before the higher ones. This is not a metaphor about moral decline. It is a claim about the earth itself, about cavities and voids, and the order in which they open. And it is the same claim, almost word for word, that the tablet of the city beneath the earth makes from the other direction. Two tablets, written to be read separately, describing the same event from opposite ends. The one below says the seals fail from the bottom up. The one about the watchers says the loosening below is the first sign that the term above is ending. Lay them side by side, and they are not two prophecies. They are one mechanism, described by two witnesses. The second sign, the abandonment of the watch, is the one that should make the back of your neck cold, because it is the only sign on the tablet that you can verify yourself, right now, without digging or flying or waiting. The scribe says, the term ends when the counting stops, when the knowledge is lost, when a generation arises that no longer marks the nights, and no longer believes there was ever anything to mark them for. He describes, 4,000 years ago, the precise condition of the modern world. We do not count the nights. We do not keep the watch. The overwhelming majority of people alive have never heard that there was a watch to keep, and would laugh at the idea. The tablet does not treat this forgetting as harmless. It treats it as the next to last thing that happens, the penultimate tick of the clock. And the unbearable implication is that the more certain a civilization becomes that there is nothing to watch for, the closer that civilization has come to the end of the count. Our confidence is not evidence of safety. On the tablet, our confidence is the sign itself. The third sign is the one the translator would not paraphrase. He transcribed it and left it without comment. It says, "The height will not keep its time, and the deep will answer, and the sky that was placed will move from its place. The moon that was hung will waver, and in the night it wavers. The watchers will not descend as they fell before, in fire and in flood. They will simply be here, as if they had never been gone, as if the seal had only ever been a thin agreement that everyone had decided to honor. And the moment the last person stopped honoring it, it was as though it had never been." That is the end of the legible text, the final cycle of the count. The figure that would let us close the conversion and name the year exactly was on the part of the tablet where the fire burned hottest, where even the depth scan finds only melted, structureless glass. The number that matters most is the number the fire took. Whether that fire was an accident of some ancient destruction, or whether someone, long ago, understood exactly what the tablet said and made very sure the final figure would never be read, the tablet does not tell us. It only tells us that the fire was hot enough and aimed, if it was aimed with terrible precision, at the one number we would most want to know. So let me bring this back to solid ground. Because I promised you honesty, and the ground is where honesty lives. I cannot tell you the year, no one can. The final cycle is gone, the flood baseline is contested, and the conversion has error bars wide enough to drive a century through. Anyone who hands you a date from this tablet is lying, and they are lying about the one part the fire specifically destroyed. What I can tell you is everything around the missing number, and it is enough to keep me up at night. A burned tablet, unreadable for 70 years, gives up under a modern scan, a structured countdown, started at a prehistoric event, run forward in the base 60 math the Sumerians used for the heavens, terminating in a window that no matter how you set the baseline brackets our own time. It names the prisoners as the Watchers, ties their release above to the loosening of the seals below, and lists as its final warning sign the exact condition we are living in right now, a world that has stopped counting, stopped watching, and stopped believing there was ever anything to count or watch for. And it agrees, sign for sign, with the tablet of the city beneath the earth and the tablet of the vessel hung in the sky. 3 documents, 3 scribes, 3 different lifetimes, 1 story. The deep, the height, and the clock that governs both. They were not copying a fashion. Fashions drift. They were preserving a warning, and they preserved it so faithfully that even fire and 4,000 years could not fully erase it. The Sumerians ended this tablet, like the others, with a command, and on the burned tablet it is the last thing the scan recovered before the glass, scorched but whole, as if the scribe had pressed it deeper than all the rest, to make sure it survived whatever was coming. It says, "Keep the count. The watch is the seal. And if the day comes that no one remembers to watch, then the term is already spent, and what was sealed is already free. And the only thing left to decide is whether you will be among the few who see it coming." They kept the count for 4,000 years. We let it lapse in less than 1 century, and somewhere in a sealed case a burned tablet holds a number we will never read, pointing at a year that every honest conversion places uncomfortably close to this one. If you want to know the names of the Watchers and what the older tablets say they will do first when they are no longer watched, and that is where this goes next. And it is the part I have been most reluctant to read aloud. Subscribe and we will say the names together, because the tablet was right about one thing already, beyond any argument, beyond any baseline, beyond any doubt. We stopped watching. That sign at least has already come true.